Hi, good evening. My name is Becky Bauman, and I am here to welcome you this evening as we gather together for our support of Dove. I'm here to share a story which is a difficult one, and it is one that far too many women and children are familiar with. I grew up in Quincy, and I am a graduate of North Quincy High School. I married my childhood sweetheart that I had known for 10 years. We were married for 6, and we had 2 children. I thought that at the time of getting married that I knew everything that I needed to know about him and our relationship, and I found out that that wasn't true very quickly into the marriage. The first time that he knocked me down, I had 2 experiences that happened immediately. One was that I was totally shocked and surprised and stunned. And the other one was to hear myself say, well, that's okay. I must have deserved it. He's mad at me. I also heard myself say, if he does it again, but he hurts me or bruises me, then I'll leave. And then another time happened when I got knocked down. Another time happened, I got pushed against the wall. And I found myself every time these incidents happened that I would set the bar lower and I would not make the decision to leave. The beginning of this abuse started before there were children, and then when children came, there was also the commitment of needing to be present for my babies. I had no money. I had no access to money. I didn't work. My life was totally and completely controlled, and I thought that that was normal. I was given an allowance, and I was told, well, you can buy what you want with your allowance, but week by week there would be less money for groceries, so in order to fill the cupboard, my allowance would go for the groceries, so there was never any sense of me being able to do something for myself, like buy a plant or a new blouse or something such as that. I am known by several different names. Pastor Becky is one of them because I'm a pastor here in Quincy. Mummy or Mom, Grammy B, Daughter. And those names are so beautiful to me because they're so much nicer than you're stupid, you're not smart, you don't know what you're doing, you never could do anything. I'm not going to take you out because you're too fat. I'll let you make a new outfit because you know how to sew, but only after you lose 10 pounds, because remember, you're too fat. I lived in a situation where we had an apartment and I could only heat 2 of the rooms out of a 5-room apartment. And so I would sit in the kitchen, which had the heat from the stove, with a rocking chair. And I had a friend that came over and visited one day, and she said to my son, who at that point was 4, how come there's a rocking chair in here? And he said, that's where Mommy comes every day and cries. I didn't realize that my children were observing as much as they were observing, and that they were being impacted in the manners in which they were. I didn't understand that I was being abused because that happens to other people. That doesn't happen to someone like me. There weren't any clothes for the children. I wasn't allowed to use disposable diapers. There was no money for Christmas gifts because I knew how to sew, and so I was told I needed to make gifts for family members. I remember being given a box of chocolates for Valentine's Day and being told, you can only eat 1 a day and I'm going to count them. This continued until I finally, at one point, asked a friend, do you think there's something wrong? And the response was, if you're asking the question, then yes, something's wrong. And I realized that I needed to get out. So after a weekend of being by myself with the children because he was off drinking and doing his thing. I called my home, my parents. I had a place to go. I had a support system that I didn't know was there. And they welcomed me back and my children. I packed everything I could into the car and I drove to my parents' house with the dog. And we never went back. We went through series of different court situations, but we maintained separate households. The last time he pushed me down was in my separate space. This time, I didn't make excuses. I stood up and I called the police. This time, a police officer came and sat me down and said, "You need to go to the hospital because this needs to be documented." This officer was about the same age as me, and he said, "What's happening to you is not right." He told me how it was in his household between he and his wife and sharing the care of the children. And I began to realize vividly that life was different for other people. He turned me on to an organization named Dove. I had no idea what that was. I learned over the years that Dove was there to support me and my family. I had support groups that I attended with other women who had similar stories. I was no longer alone. I was no longer by myself. I became stronger because of Dove. Dove provided for me a court advocate when I pressed charges for having been pushed down the last time. Dove was there to catch me. And the whole purpose of Dove is to continue to be here to catch other women and their families. This was over 30 years ago, and it breaks my heart to know that we still have to have Dove. But I want you to consider how very difficult it is for a woman who has been abused to recognize that she's abused, how very difficult it is for her to understand that she has a right to be treated better, how very difficult it is for a woman who has no access to money to be able to put together finances in order to get out. If you are a homeowner and you have the freedom of going and choosing what apartment you want to live in, you know already that it requires a lot of money to put down so that you can enter into your own apartment and get your own key. A woman who's abused most likely doesn't have that ability. The ability that you take for granted in making the choices for your life are stripped away from a woman who is abused. And so tonight I'm going to ask that you consider what it is you can give and help Dove so that in turn we as a society can help those who are struggling so hard to just find out what's normal, to just be normal, and to understand that they have a right to be loved and cared for and supported. As part of my journey, I went back to school and became a pastor, and I also recognized that I like to write, and so I have written a poem that I would like to share with you. This is called No More. No more, she said silently to herself, as she tasted the iron at the tip of her tongue, while the drops of blood dripped from the crack, split open upon her lip. No more, she said silently to herself as she lay trembling on the floor, cowering below the shadows of professed love. No more, she said silently to herself as she awoke to begin the new day with no food in the fridge for the babies and no money to buy any. No more, she said silently to herself as she counted the change gathered from the floor and the cushions of the sofa, hoping for enough to buy a quart of milk. Oh, no more, she said silently as she lay waiting to hear the key turn and the creak on the floorboards. No more, she said silently as the days turned to years and her hair turned to gray. No more, she said finally out loud, again and again and again, until she could hear her own voice cry out, "No more." On that day, she shouted, "No more," as her lip healed and her smile returned. "No more," she shouted as she arose and stood straight and brave. "No more," she shouted as she deposited her first paycheck into her own account. "No more," she shouted as the key she heard was her own, opening up her space and offering her sanctuary and freedom. "No more," she shouted as she touched her gray locks that surrounded a face lined from her own story. "Today, I become the me I am meant to be," she shouted for all to hear. "Today, I become the me I am meant to be." Please support Dove in any manner that you can. Thank you so much.